Now, every so often in response to one of my videos, and usually it's a video that criticizes The Last Jedi in some respect, I'll get people who say in the comments that I hate Star Wars and that I should stop making videos about it because I clearly no longer have love for this franchise, which from my point of view is both funny and a bit ironic because, aside of my personal relationships with friends, family, and so on, Star Wars is one of the things I love and care about the most in this world. And sure, you might think that's kinda sad that it means so much to me, but it's a hobby and a passion of mine, and it's been a part of my life since as far back as I can even remember. In fact, one of the earliest vivid memories I have is of watching Return of the Jedi in the theater when I was 5 years old, which is probably part of the reason why it's my favorite Star Wars movie, and why Ewoks really don't bother me like they do some people who were older when that movie first came out. A lot like how Jar Jar Binks doesn't so much bother those who were kids when The Phantom Menace first came out. Anyway, my point is there is absolutely nothing that could ever kill my love for Star Wars or make me hate it. Nothing. It's very much a part of who I am, and the original trilogy and even the prequels, though to a somewhat lesser degree, are something akin to holy or sacred texts to me. There's nothing anyone could ever say, or nothing a new Star Wars movie could do, that would ever change how I feel about those movies, or that would make me hate Star Wars on the whole. And I absolutely believe that is a sentiment, or one like it, that is shared by a vast majority of the fans of Star Wars who have either turned away from the franchise as of late, or are still here but are heavily criticizing its current direction. And the fact that people are still talking about their dislike of The Last Jedi, for example, 8 months after it was released, is oddly proof about just how much they deeply care about this franchise. Because when people don't really care about something, they tend not to waste their time or effort on it, even to oppose it. They instead just let it be and focus their attention and energy elsewhere. A good way here to begin to understand how people can so heavily criticize Star Wars and can do it continuously and relentlessly for months on end, yet still love it, is to look at professional sports and to compare it to your favorite team in whatever sport you prefer. And if you're not a fan of pro sports, you likely know someone who is, and from your point of view, they treat it far more seriously and care about it far more than you think they should. Which kind of goes along with what I said earlier about some who might laugh at me for my love of Star Wars and how seriously I tend to take it. Anyway, the team I'm mostly going to use as an example here is the New York Yankees from Major League Baseball, and it's not because I'm personally a fan of theirs, but rather because I acknowledge that they are the most successful team in the history of baseball, and they're the pinnacle most other teams are trying to reach. And because of this, their fans tend to expect them to always be a winner, to not just always be among the best teams in baseball, but as unrealistic as it is, to win the World Series every season. In fact, expectations for the Yankees from their fans and the team itself are so high that anything less than a World Series win feels like a disappointing season. And last season, for example, the Yankees made it to Game 7 of the American League Championship Series, one game from the World Series, but they lost to the Astros. And many fans were bitterly disappointed and considered the whole season a failure, and weren't shy about voicing their anger and criticizing their team, despite how well they had done. And along with this, their manager, Joe Girardi, was even fired in the offseason, despite what pretty much any other team out there would have considered a great, successful season. And the Yankees are certainly not unique in this way. Every team in every sport has fans that deeply love and care about their team, but will trash them when they have a bad season and take to sports talk radio and lament about where it all went wrong, to say what could have been if they'd only done this or that during the season, and what moves they should now make in the offseason to get back on a winning track. They'll even oftentimes complain about the team's coach or general manager, or about the whole damn ownership, and demand someone be fired and someone new brought in to fix this mess that the franchise has become. And yes, before I go on here, I will acknowledge that obviously there are differences between the fanbase of a professional sports team and the Star Wars fandom, not to mention sports and movies in general. But you do have to admit the similarities are rather striking here, because in both cases, fans really only want what's best for the franchise that they care about. They're not criticizing it because they suddenly hate it, though they may utter those very words from time to time, or say things like, "I'm never watching another Yankees game again because of one bad or crucial loss," or "I'm never watching another Star Wars movie again after one bad movie." They're instead saying these things because they very much want to see things improve, not because they have or want to give up all hope. And the reason, for example, why people are actively boycotting Star Wars right now is in the hopes that things will get better, not because they've given up completely on it. And that is what being a fan tends to be all about, the hope of seeing and, in some small way, being a part of true greatness. So when fans angrily express their displeasure, it's actually showing just how much they still deeply care about it because of how invested they are either in their team or in Star Wars or whatever else it might be that a person will heavily criticize despite still loving it. And again, when people truly don't care about something, they usually don't waste their time to go out of their way to criticize it and to keep criticizing it for months and months on end, which has been the case with Star Wars. And to keep with the sports analogies here, the original Star Wars trilogy was basically the perfect season, where a team goes undefeated and wins a championship. It's essentially the 1972 Miami Dolphins, who won every single game, including the Super Bowl. And after such a season, there's really nothing left to do but try and duplicate that incredible success, though even managing to repeat it is not going to feel anywhere near as magical of a season as it did the first time, especially for those fans who lived through it, experienced it, and in their own way shared it with the team. And along those same lines, I'm sure any younger sports fan out there has heard someone older talking about how much better the game was back in their day, or how they played it the right way then. And these are essentially the problems the Star Wars prequels faced. There was no way they were going to be better, or even as good, as the originals for those who held the original trilogy, that perfect season, in such high regard. And though many longtime Star Wars fans, those who first fell in love with it during the time of the original trilogy, can and do still very much love and enjoy the prequel trilogy in many cases, I don't know that I've ever met anyone who grew up on the original trilogy that loves the prequel trilogy more. And I'm not saying that that isn't the case for some fans out there, but they are probably very few and far between. And now the problem the sequel trilogy faces has been compounded to an even greater degree, because not only are the fans who came about in the time period of the original trilogy still here and still wanting to somehow have that magic recaptured, you now also have the fans who grew up on the prequels who love those movies the most and want to see them honored. Not to mention the fans of the expanded universe who, for decades, followed an entirely different timeline that these movies are now erasing. In other words, new Star Wars has to compete with the memories of the way it was when someone first fell in love with it, and people tend to romanticize the way things were back then, when they were younger, which really is just human nature, I think, to want to think of our childhoods with a certain degree of fondness, and like things were just better back then. Just like some sports fans will steadfastly stand by the fact that players back in their day were better than today's players. And yeah, again, I obviously know there are differences between sports and Star Wars. The biggest one probably being what constitutes a good season in a particular sport is far more objective than what constitutes a good movie. There is a plethora of statistics to look at in sports, chief among them being a team's final record and whether or not they won a championship. And although movies have box office results, those aren't always indicative of how good a movie was in the eyes of the fans. Transformers is a good example of a franchise that seems to continuously make a ton of money, despite heavy criticism from critics and fans alike. And to be absolutely clear here, I'm not trying to paint older Star Wars fans, of which I'm among because I'm 40 years old, as people stuck in the past and that they only hate the new trilogy because it's not as good as what they got when they were kids. Because I dare say most were very open-minded, myself included, going into this and were very, very excited to see the story of their favorite characters continued. Instead, what I'm trying to do here is to point out that we're all fans of the same thing, and we're all rooting for what's best for Star Wars, but we just can't agree on what that is. This kind of thing happens all the time in sports when two fans of the same team get together and can't agree on what moves the team should make to get better. But more often than not, these two fans can at least agree that they have the best interest of the team in mind and just want to see a winner. And why Star Wars fans cannot seem to understand the same holds true for them is very unfortunate and has led to a lot of animosity within the fandom, to put it mildly. Because as I say in my videos quite often, if you loved The Last Jedi, I do not hate you, not at all. I understand you may take it personally when I criticize aspects of that movie because of how much you do love Star Wars and because you enjoyed that movie. But it's not meant to be viewed as hate or anger towards you. It's supposed to be seen as a fan sharing his view of some aspect of Star Wars and letting other people have their say in the comments below. I'm not here to hate on fellow fans of Star Wars, even those who completely disagree with me, and there's plenty of you out there, because you are a fellow fan of the same franchise I love. That's awesome, and I'd love to talk some Star Wars with you, and even to talk about one of the things that we seem to have a huge difference of opinion on, that being The Last Jedi. And whether you want to believe it or not, the haters, as they're labeled, do not hate Star Wars, not in the least. They love it, and they want to love these new movies too, but they have taken issues with them. Issues you may and can disagree with, but that are important to them nonetheless. And one of the biggest issues has been the handling of the legacy characters. And to make one last sports analogy here, what has been done to them would be like a new ownership coming in and tearing down a team's Ring of Honor, or in the case of Yankees fans, destroying the hallowed Monument Park, to instead highlight the new players in some respect. And I know that's a rather silly or ridiculous analogy because no sports team would ever do something that stupid, but a lot of Star Wars fans feel that's exactly what was done to their heroes, that instead of building upon their legacy and adding new characters or players to the Ring of Honor, you decided to use their heroes to try and propel these new characters or players forward, instead of allowing them to, one day, earn their place within the Star Wars Ring of Honor. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about this video and the analogy I used. Does it make sense? Does it help you understand the situation better? Or is it none of the above? Let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.